Our unit study for this week focused on sculptors, sculptures, and the history of sculpting. We did a couple hands-on projects that kind of got our feet wet in this whole form of art and creativity. Come along with us and I'll share with you what we did and what we read. I'm Julia. Thanks for stopping by my channel, Freestyling It. As I was preparing for this unit study, one artist that particularly came to mind is that of Degas. And so I checked out several books of the library about the very famous sculpture of the Little Dancer. So we read about Degas and the Little Dancer, the figure that Degas crafted. You can see it's the actual photo of it surrounded by an illustration. And the author of this book takes the liberty to kind of think about what the model's life may have looked like. Her name was Marie, and it is kind of fictionalized in that sense, as it's not really known who Marie was or what she did later on in her life or where she died or where she's buried or anything like that. But it was a good story to read and one that piqued our interest in sculpting to begin with and in other forms of art like painting and such. Along the lines of Degas, we also read this one, What Degas Saw, which was kind of like a walk through Paris, and then how Degas interpreted the things he saw. So here they are. He is at a milliner's shop, and then here is a painting that he did of that same scene. Now, I know I've mentioned in other videos, I've been choosing a book to read for myself along the theme of our unit study, and the book that I chose this time was called Little Dancer Aged 14, the true story behind Degas's masterpiece. Now, reading this, it kind of spoiled the children's books about Degas for me, because it really gave a very full picture, and it wasn't necessarily a beautiful picture of the life and times of the Little Dancer, of Marie. And it was a very interesting book, and I did read it all the way through. There's a lot to think about, even in the sculpture itself, so it really promoted deeper thought than I had ever given to this sculpture, even though I've been aware of it for since I was a child. I was aware that this sculpture existed. So Little Dancer, age 14. Again, I would recommend pursuing adult reading on your topic. And it doesn't have to be nonfiction, as I have made the example of now. You could check out a well-researched novel about a given time or a place or a topic, and that could really pique your interest as well. And that's really the goal in reading as an adult, is that your interest is piqued, your curiosity is aroused, and you are wondering and asking questions and learning and thinking things that you never have thought before, and being made aware of things that you never realized before. It really shapes one's perspective. This was an informational book on sculpting, and this is above my children's level. So my oldest is 5 years old, so we're not going to read all these words. However, what we did do was look at every single picture, and we talked about it. Sometimes I would skim, sometimes I would paraphrase for him. Other times, if he asked a specific question about a specific thing, I would skim in the words, and then I would come up with a paragraph or the couple sentences that specifically answered his question, and I would read those aloud. We always love these kinds of books because they really give us a lot of like food for conversation and food for questions and food for curiosity, that process of curiosity to happen. Dave, the potter, artist, poet, slave. And we did do a little bit of thinking about pottery as a form of sculpting. And so this was a really interesting account of a real person who was a slave, but he knew a skill, which was a bit unusual. And he would actually inscribe little poems into some of his works. And so not only was he a slave who knew a skill, but he was a slave who knew how to read and write. So the rest of the books are about other artists. This one is Michelangelo, and these illustrations are awesome. Diane Stanley is the author and the illustrator of this book. My son actually browsed through all the pictures of this book several times in one sitting. He took about a half an hour to look through this book, paging through, stopping and asking questions. And I think it's credit to the work of the illustrator. And then combined with the actual like pictures of the sculptures or the paintings that Michelangelo worked on. This is a really wonderful resource, and there's a lot of words on this page. Like, all of these pages were very, very full of words, and I didn't know how that was going to go with my son, if he was going to want to listen to all those words or stay engaged in the story, but he very much did. And in fact, he kept asking me to continue when I would be stopped or interrupted. And I'd be like, okay, can we keep reading? Now, I don't know how much he understood in it, but he certainly followed the general storyline. Here's one last picture to show you. The other two books are artists that I had never heard of. This is called A Life Made by Hand, the story of Ruth Asawa. And she made sculptures out of wire. So reading these kind of books kind of show that art and it has many different expressions and takes many different shapes and forms, literally. And so some people use marble, some people use clay, some people use wire, etc. The list goes on. It was really neat to kind of get a bit of an overview of a couple different options for sculpting. And then the last book that we read is Two Brothers, Four Hands. This is the artists Alberto and Diego Giacometti. I had never heard of them, but when I had searched online for books about sculptors, this had come up. It's a thick book, but the words aren't a lot on each page. And it's quite a story. Sometimes I think that the lives of artists, as they're depicted by their biographers, are really quite dismal. It's just kind of amazing that there's kind of a similarity that runs along a lot of artists in a lot of artists' lives. They often live very simply. They often don't have a ton of money, at least to start out with. And in this story in particular, something that was really neat was the relationship that the brothers shared, in that it was the two of them working together to create these sculptures. This was also kind of neat because we have just come out of a week of learning about airplanes, and we were focusing particularly on the Wright brothers. And so they're another brother team that really did some amazing work. So it was kind of neat having affirmation in the artist world of two brothers that kind of devoted their lives to one another and worked together for their whole lives, creating and supporting one another. We did a couple of hands-on activities. I will link the tutorial that we used for sculpting these fish figures down below in the description box. But we had a lot of fun crafting these little figures and then painting them a couple days later after the clay had dried. That painting activity then turned into pulling out pages of coloring books, and my daughter chose some pictures without any direction or guidance from me about pottery and how God is the potter. We also worked on making some cookies and rolling them out and then cutting shapes in the dough and baking them and then enjoying, of course, the finished product. towards the end of the week, I just had the spontaneous idea to make my homemade marshmallow recipe, which is not hard at all, sculpt snowmen out of the marshmallows. And so we had a lot of fun with that. I know specifically the snowmen were a big hit for my kids. At the end of the week, on Sunday when we go and visit my family, both of my older kids said that we needed to make more marshmallows so that we could make more snowman sculptures with their aunties. And that's what we did. We had a fun time doing that as well. The inspiration for all of this came from God's Big World for this week. Basically, this whole issue kind of corresponded with the suggestions in the parent-teacher guide. So they suggested that we sculpt little fish out of clay, and the cover story was about a sunfish that was caught in a net that was rescued. The next story was about Italy and its glassworks, and how the cost of gas going up has caused the glassworks to have to consider whether or not it's going to stay open. The gas is what powers up the ovens for the glass. So glasswork is another form of sculpting as well, which we did actually watch a video of and dove into that a little bit, but not in book form. And then the last story was actually about a sculpture of Mr. Rogers. And that was really neat because we actually looked up some of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood episodes, and we watched a couple together and found them very edifying, very delightful. And I had watched a couple when I was a kid. We didn't have TV growing up, but my grandma used to record some for us, so it was kind of neat to kind of go back in childhood a little bit and remember how I enjoyed Mr. Rogers growing up. The last book I want to talk about is a book that we did not read this week, but we have read prior to this week. So this was not at all connected with our study of sculpture. However, we did connect it through conversation, and it's called The Gods Must Be Angry. Now, this is a book written by missionaries. It's based in Thailand. It's based on a true story, and it's basically a story of how a little boy accidentally knocked the head off of one of the sculptures in his house. And these sculptures were not just decorations, they were reverenced as gods. And it's the story of how the family expected to be punished by the gods. And the missionaries who were sharing the message of Jesus Christ with the people of Thailand shared with them that they do not need to fear and that they can trust the Lord Jesus, not the idol. So The Gods Must Be Angry. I highly recommend that book as a tie-in with sculpture and sculpting. I think it's a very beneficial read, especially if you love Jesus and you love to read about how the gospel impacts people's lives around the world. Well, that's all I have for today. This has felt like a light week. Like, this book stack is nothing compared to some of the other book stacks I've shared in other videos. We really took it easy comparatively. Well, thanks for joining me for this video, and I hope that you might stick around, view some other of my videos on my channel. I'm coming out with new content every week as much as I'm able. Obviously, I'm a young mom with a full-time job of 3 little ones, so that may not always be possible, but that is what I am trying my best to do, is to post a video every weekend. Keep sharing the discovery.